Good morning guys, thank you for joining me for Walking with the Word. Those of you who know me will know that I love to travel. I've travelled as a single lad. Since getting married, I married a beautiful girl who loves to travel too, and we've travelled as a couple. And then as a family, we've now travelled and backpack as a family too. So we love to travel, we love to backpack, explore new places, see the world. And I want to talk about that today. What can we learn from travel, from backpacking, that we can apply to our own spiritual walks and our spiritual journey? And this is an analogy that's there in the Bible too. In various places the Bible talks about how we're foreigners in this world, we're pilgrims, sojourners, travellers, backpackers. Well, the Bible doesn't use the phrase backpackers, but we're in this world living in a foreign country. This is not our place of residence. Our citizenship and our residence is in heaven. That's where we have our identity, our rights, our inheritance, our security. And when we live in this earth, we do it as these kind of temporary residents, sojourners, travellers, people who are here temporarily. And I think there's various things that we can kind of learn and apply to our spiritual walks from this. And I want to share some different aspects of what it is to be a traveller in this world, to be someone who's passing through the world. And the first one is that our time in this world is temporary, in the same way that when I go backpacking through different countries, or when we go as a family, we're only there for whether that's a few days, maybe a few weeks, or a month or so at the most. You're temporarily located, and you know that your time there is temporary, so you want to make the most of it. You want to see what there is to see, experience what there is to experience, and just really embrace the experience. And in fact, being temporarily resident on Earth doesn't mean being detached from the world and not experiencing it or enjoying it. It's actually the opposite in my view. You want to make the most of this time on Earth. God's created a beautiful world with so much to see and do, and we want to treasure our time here and make the most of it. And then what about conforming? So when we go travelling, we love experiencing and seeing and getting to know new cultures, but you kind of retain your own culture as well. You don't kind of suddenly conform to the new culture. You want to respect it and value it and recognise that there's a new culture that you're travelling in, but you don't assume a completely new cultural identity just because you're in a place as a backpacker. And that's the same thing in the way that we as Christians live on the earth. We have our identity and our culture is set in heaven. It's with God, and in fact we're called to not conform but be transformed, to continue to find our identity and our roots more deeply in that heavenly identity, rather than conforming to the pattern of the earth. So just because the whole world and all of society tells us that there's certain things that we should believe or affirm or do, may not be the case. We need to check in with God. We need to check in with our heavenly residence. So that's the first thing. So we've got this idea of conforming. Another experience of travel is that it can be really humbling. Being a backpacker and living in different countries is a humbling existence. It's a humbling reality, because so much of the time you don't have a clue what's going on. There might be language barriers. You might struggle to communicate with people. You might struggle to be understood. Often you're vulnerable because you don't know how to get around or do things, and it kind of takes a certain amount of humility. And actually we should have this humility on Earth too, not presuming that we know everything or understand everything, but that experience of being humbled is quite a good experience, and it's quite interesting to apply that to our spiritual walks too. A kind of similar line, when you backpack and travel, very often you're vulnerable. You end up having to be hosted by people, and I love some of the people that we've met as we've done that, whether that's actually staying in people's homes and sharing food with them, or we've done a lot of hitchhiking too, and you actually get to experience a lot of kindness and generosity. So in spiritual terms, living in this world as people who aren't resident in this world means we do have to trust and depend on people. When Jesus sent out his disciples to go and tell the good news from village to village, he said, take very little with you and go and stay in homes, go and be hosted by people, be willing to receive hospitality. And it's strange, because I think as Christians we should assume that we should always be the ones that are giving and doing and serving, which is true. We should always be doing those things, but that's not in contrast to being willing to receive hospitality and be hosted. And actually that's a humbling thing in itself. Sometimes it can be harder to receive than it can be to give. So this idea of receiving hospitality. Be willing to receive hospitality gracefully and graciously, and be thankful for it. Living in different countries can also make you more objective about the way you see things. So one of the things I found after travelling to different countries around the world for the first time is when I came back to England, I began to understand the things that characterise our English culture, what things make us English, things that you've just grown up with and not realised that they're particular or unique to England, and all of a sudden, because you stepped out of your own culture, you see it. So it kind of creates a sort of objectivity. But if we're talking about this in spiritual terms, if I'm saying that our residence is in heaven with God, the Father of truth, the creator of the universe, and that should help us see the world more objectively and more clearly, and sometimes we will be confused, we'll not understand what to do in particular situations. I'm not talking about never feeling confused or lost or bemused by things. What I'm talking about is having a sort of objectivity that's grounded in the fact that there is a God who created the universe, he loves everyone, and the universe is created in a way that's structured and ordered and beautiful, and we should expect to see those things in the world, the order and the beauty and the structure. Objectivity. What about possessions? So when you go backpacking, you really have to think about what you take. You've only got a bag of finite volume that needs to be able to carry on your back, especially when you've got kids and you start needing to bring clothes and nappies and things for them as well. You're really like thinking about, how do I pack down to the very last thing? You know, that bottle of shampoo is too big, I need one this big, and everything gets kind of thought through so carefully. You have to really prioritize and think about what actually matters in terms of possessions. What can I bring? You have to live lightly, because everything you take with you goes with you everywhere. It's carried on your back, so you don't want to be bringing your kitchen sink along with you. And I think there's a parallel here spiritually, that we can just weigh ourselves down with earthly possessions, so much so that we lose focus on our heavenly residence. We're too weighed down with all the things that we're trying to carry around on earth, and we're not maneuverable, we're not mobile, we're encumbered, we're weighed down by all these possessions. I think possessions can do that to us. There's nothing innately wrong with having possessions. I'm not saying that possessions are evil or wrong. I just think they can kind of weigh us down spiritually. So it's really thinking about, let's prioritise what things do we really need, and how do we pack them down as much as possible in order to make our journey, our experience, our travel on earth more enjoyable. So our relationship with possessions changes, and it creates a kind of simplicity of existence, a simplicity of being. There's something so freeing about having everything that you need to travel indefinitely just in your backpack. I remember a point when we were hitchhiking in Kyrgyzstan, and we got a ride in this lorry. We were going around this lake, and they dropped us off just outside this town, and it was a few miles to walk into the town. And I remember just getting off and that sense of freedom. Like, had my little boy, he was a year old at the time, he was in the sling on the front, had a giant backpack on the back. It was an Osprey transporter, bulging, with all of the nappies and clothes and things that we need, but it was just carried. We could go where we want, so we had that kind of freedom. And sometimes God calls us to move and change and do things in the world. And it's like, when you've got that calling, are you weighed down by possessions? Have you got a bag on that's too heavy to carry? Or do you have that freedom where it's like, no, God, you're calling me to go there, I'm ready to go. So there's that kind of simplicity of life, and that kind of comes with the final thing, which is maneuverability. When you backpack, you're maneuverable, you're flexible. You could go there or you could go there, and there's that kind of freedom that comes with it. And I think when we get so tied into routines and commitments and things, we can sometimes lose the flexibility. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that everyone needs to become a backpacker to have a good walk with God. God's calling for you might well be to stay in the very same home, in the very same place, very same town and very same church that you were kind of born and raised in, and maybe even the same place that your parents have been. It's not necessarily true that God's calling you to go and do things. What I'm talking about here is a willingness, a mobility, a readiness to move if God were to call you, and that's where I think this idea of kind of living as travellers and sojourners and exiles in a foreign land is important for us as Christians to grasp this. But God can have callings for us which are very stationary and very fixed, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But He may well have a calling for someone who's been very fixed and very stationary, very mobile. He may well have a calling for them to go and move and change place. And if we're not willing and ready and open to do that, that can create an obstacle that will block us from progressing in our spiritual journeys and moving forward and walking with God. So these are just some thoughts, some ideas. Obviously you can tell as I talk about travel, it's something I'm passionate about and I love, and I don't want to come across too strongly. I certainly don't want to imply that you know, becoming a traveller is the only way to move forward in our spiritual journeys. What I really want to say is that we just have to get close to God. We have to put our identity, our residence, our mindset in there, in heaven. So even if we are mobile on earth and fixed through our whole lives, we don't live in the earth as if it's our permanent residence, as if it's the only place we're going to exist, because God's got an eternity of joy and delight and good things set apart for those who walk with him and believe in him and trust him, and you can know that's the case. So thank you for joining me today. I'm just going to leave it with a prayer and let you guys get on with your day. Father, I just pray for anyone and everyone watching this, help them to establish their full identity and residence in the kingdom of heaven, to know that heaven is their ultimate and true home, and that help us to live on the earth as people who live lightly and travel and backpack through this world, not getting bound down or weighed down by the things that we own, and not getting encumbered or distracted. Help us to use all of our resources, our possessions, our time, our energy to serve you and your kingdom. Father, thank you that you have a calling for each person who's watching this. You have a plan for them. You have desires. Help them to move closer to your calling. Bless them in Jesus' name. Amen. So thank you for joining me this morning. I'm putting these videos out each day, so yeah, keep checking them out. They'll be out each morning with the exception of Sundays. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.